Hi, I'm Michelle Clare. I'm a psychic medium, an angel communicator. I also communicate with life guides, and I've had 3 near-death experiences. I'm in the middle of writing a book right now, and I'm really happy to be able to share with you what I've learned from the other side. I was raised Catholic, which for me gave me a lot of comfort in knowing that I had angels and saints and Mother Mary who wanted to help me. However, when I was in first grade, my dog died, and I remember going to Sunday school at that time, and the teacher told me that my dog didn't go to heaven because dogs didn't have souls. And at that point, I started to realize that what I felt and I knew inside of who God or Source was different than the God or Source that she knew. So as I went on in life, I started to just have an awareness that there seemed to be a bigger understanding available for all of us, even though I was very young at this age. And at the age of 12, my grandfather, who had been my favorite grandfather, passed away. And after his passing, I realized that he and I were still communicating. I would have dream visits from him. I would have telepathic communication from him. And I would actually sometimes see him and get messages from him. I would start to share these with my mom, and my mom would say to me, "That's what you think Grandpa would say if he was still here." So at a young age, at the age of 12, I learned to keep this information for myself because I realized not everyone else was having these experiences. And then as time went on, my grandmother passed, and I started to have the same experience with her. I would share it with my mom, and my mom would say the same thing. She believed me, she just didn't understand it. And so what I realized was what was happening in my life was already out of her scope for being able to comprehend how this communication was going on. In the year 2000, I had my first near-death experience, and at that point in time, I was newly married. I had never heard of the term near-death experience, but what I really realized was that I had an experience that was more vivid than my everyday life. We were in the hospital visiting my sister-in-law who had just given birth, and I went into the hallway to talk to her RN, who happened to be my friend from high school. While I was in the hallway talking to her, I had a seizure. And what I remember from this is opening my eyes and really seeing that my grandmother was holding me in her lap. My head was in her lap. And she looked at me so gentle and so sweetly. She was the youngest, healthiest version of her that I could remember. And I remember feeling the bliss and the unconditional love and really starting to look around and let my consciousness focus on where I was. And what I realized is we were in this room and it had white walls, and yet the walls themselves seemed to be alive and breathing. It was as if every molecule inside of them lit up with this light and love from the inside out. And as I started to look around this beautiful space, I noticed that standing next to her was an angel that appeared to be about 12 feet tall. And when I looked at this angel, the first thing I wanted to see was her large feather wings. So as I moved my eyes to see her feather wings, what I actually saw was that her wings were made of light, and they seemed to span almost eternity. I couldn't even see where they ended. As I looked at her, I was truly just drawn into her presence. And I remember thinking to myself, "What is your name?" And to my surprise, she answered me. She said, "My name is Madeline, and I'm one of your guardian angels." I didn't know anything about telepathic communication at that point in my life, and I felt a little startled that she was able to read my mind and answer me in my mind. But at the same time, there was this overwhelming sense of peace. So as I laid in this timeless space that I was in no hurry to leave, all of a sudden I heard someone yelling, "Code, code, code." And the next thing I know, I was back in my body. It felt like I had been dropped out of a 2-story building. It didn't hurt, but my body felt dense. I went from feeling light as a feather to like a brick of cement. It was the most beautiful experience. I was then admitted into the hospital, and they ran tests. They were not able to find what caused the seizure. But what I realized in hindsight, since that was the only one I've ever had, was that it was an awakening to the angelic realm. And it really gave me so much peace to know that heaven knew I was coming, even though in the moments before I didn't. My grandma and my beautiful guardian angel were waiting right there for me to hold me in that space until I was back in my body. After I had this near-death experience, I didn't exactly have a container to put it into. It made sense to me with my Catholic roots because I believed my grandma had made it to that heavenly realm, and I already believed in angels. But what I didn't know what to do was how to apply it to my daily life. And so really, I kind of left it where it was, not knowing how to process it, and just continued on with it. I will say, though, that this was an awareness into this angelic heavenly realm that I had not been connected to before. And so I did notice more angelic presence from that moment on. It really felt like to me there was more energy. I could feel more love. I could realize that people had angels with them. I could feel their angels. I wasn't seeing them, but I started to become aware that they weren't living their lives alone, that they were walking through this lifetime with a presence of a heavenly being to accompany them. 6 years later, in May 2006, I had a second near-death experience. And at this point in my life, I was married with 3 little kids. I had a 5-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and my 6-week-old son. I was busy being a stay-at-home mom. And after I had my son, I had had multiple complications. So they decided that I needed to go in and have a D&C, which is a procedure to clear out the uterus. And they said that once that happened, I would be able to finally go home from the hospital and not be in there on the IV antibiotics anymore. The night before, I had a pit in my stomach, and I felt like I really shouldn't do this procedure. But they promised me that it would be quick, 45 minutes, and I would be out of there. So I went ahead and agreed to it. And I remember going in. I remember talking to the doctor that morning and the anesthesiologist, both of them assuring me that it would go very easy and very well. And I had had anesthesia before. And whenever I had had it, it was just a blank. There were no dreams. There were no memories. It was just a blank spot in my life. As I counted backwards for the anesthesiologist, I started to realize, as I was drifting out of this realm, that all of a sudden, my beautiful white German Shepherd, who had passed away a couple years prior to this, was walking into the operating room. She walked right up to the table that I was laying on. She laid her head on the table. She looked at me to check on me like she always did in life. And the next thing I knew, we were gone, and we were on a phenomenal beach. As I was looking at her, I realized she looked like she was 2 years old. She was young and healthy. Her fur was shiny. Her eyes were bright. We were on this amazing beach. The sand was white. There were flowers. There were colors. There were emotions and feelings and light that we don't even have here on this planet. I became really aware that what was happening was beyond my everyday life. This was not just another day at the beach. And as we were running, I started to realize that every drop in the ocean, every molecule in every flower, every piece of sand was lit up with this light and love that seemed to be emanating from the inside out. And so she and I, we ran on this beach. And at some point I start to notice the sand's not hard. We're not getting hot or tired or thirsty. And I really become aware that we're here in this place with this unconditional love and this timelessness. And once again, I'm not in a hurry to leave. The funny thing about this NDE is that I actually do not like to run. Human Michelle does not run. So here I am in this near-death experience, running on the beach with my beautiful white German Shepherd, loving every moment of it. As we were on that beach, I could feel my son, who was 6 weeks old at the time. He was back at my house with my mom, and he was calling to me. He knew that I was getting ready to leave him. At that moment, I was able to go to my son, and I remember saying to him, "I'm not going to leave you. I will find a way to stay." I didn't know what to do. I was really torn. It felt so good to be there, and yet I knew I needed to be here. So I started praying, and I started asking for help. I started saying, "It's not my time. Please help me." And the next thing I know, I was transported back into the operating room. I remember seeing my body on the table. I remember seeing doctors and nurses. I remember seeing the room light up with this beautiful white light. And at that moment, I felt Jesus. And he walked in and he looked at me like my best friend. And I knew he was there to help me. I remember the peace and the love that I felt when I looked into his eyes. And I remember just knowing that he was going to make it okay, whatever that looked like. The next thing I remember is waking up in the post-op, and it had been 3.5 hours since my surgery started. They had ruptured my uterus in multiple places, and they had missed an artery by 1 millimeter. And that was the difference of me being able to stay or go. At that point in time, when they ruptured the uterus, they pushed the infection into my body. And so I ended up being in the hospital for another week on IV antibiotics, trying to get it under control. As I started to process what happened to me, which I wasn't able to do for a while, I realized that once again, I had one of these experiences that was more vivid than my daily life. I didn't have anyone to share it with, but I realized Jesus was real, and he didn't come in asking me to repent or to bow down to him. He truly came in as my best friend. And it really gave me this life-altering change of who he was, and realizing that he is here for each of us, whether you've ever believed in him or not. And he will come in as your best friend to help you. So at that point in my life, I had these 3 little kids. It took me 4 months to get back to an 80% level of functioning. And what I realized was I never had time to process all of that. So I went into this mode of once again remembering I had this experience more real than my daily life, and not knowing what to do with it, and having no one in my life that I could share it with because I felt like it would be too much. Years later, as I started working as a medium, I started to have more regular connection with Jesus. He will come in readings. And honestly, he is very funny. He's very profound. He wants to come in and help each of us if we're open to it. But there was one particular reading that really stands out to me. It was reading for a woman, and she was telling me, well, I was raised religious. I have issues with Jesus. I literally felt Jesus come in, and he said, I have no issues with her. Tell her these are her issues. And it was just so funny because when I shared it with her, she laughed and she realized the lightheartedness that he's truly there, not judging her. He understands she was working through some things, but the issues are not his issues. He is here to help us and guide us and really meet us where we are. On November 1st, 2011, I ended up having my 3rd near-death experience. For people that like numbers, the 11-1-11 is always very significant. At that point in my life, I was still a stay-at-home mom. My kids were 5, 8, and 10, and I was just busy in my everyday life. I had compartmentalized my first 2 NDEs, not knowing what to do with it. And that day was just a regular day. I remember waking up in the morning. I remember running to Target, getting groceries, dropping the kids off at school. It was a typical day. In my house at that point in time, I had 14-foot ceilings, and about 12 feet off the ground, I had battery-operated candles that would come on every night at a certain time and automatically turn off. So about once a month, I would have to change the candle batteries. This day, my younger 2 kids were home, Josh and Sophie, and I remember telling them, after I climb up here to change these batteries, we're going to go get your sister from school. So I started to climb up the ladder, and as I got near the top, I felt it start to shift. And as it started to shift, I remember thinking, this is going to hurt. And at that moment, I was literally ripped out of my body, not in a painful way, but in a bungee cord, fast way, just extracted, in and out. And I was actually standing with these 3 people that I had never met before. They felt like close family or friends. There was an Asian man, an Egyptian woman, and a Hawaiian man. And as I stood with them, I realized that I was facing my body in the ladder, frozen in time. It was like looking at a freeze frame in a movie. And as I started to get acclimated to where I was, I started to feel that unconditional love and peace and timelessness coming in again. And at that point in time, they looked at me and they said, "What do you want to do? Do you want to stay or do you want to go?" And I remember being surprised that I had forever to make this decision. I wasn't being rushed, and yet I could see that my body would hit the floor in a second or less. And as I stood in this timeless, blissful space, I remember seeing another angel come in this near-death experience. This was different than my first angel. This one was dressed in a very deep red and gold. And as soon as I saw this angel, I knew without a doubt it was going to make sure that I was either taken home immediately or that something was shifted so that I could stay. And as I watched that angel hovering right next to the ladder in my body, I remember looking and seeing my younger two kids in the kitchen. And as I saw them, I made the decision that I needed to stay. And as I made that decision, I was downloaded with a lot of information. I was told, okay, you can stay, but you need to go back and you need to practice your mediumship and you need to help people in the way that you can help them. I was told that my marriage most likely would end in divorce and that there would be more trauma ahead. And yet in this blissful, heavenly, timeless space, I remember saying, okay, I agree, send me in. Even though they had let me know it wasn't going to be easy. At that point, I ended up falling and I hit the back of my head on the corner of my granite island. I have a 5.5-inch skull fracture, a brain bleed. I lost my taste, my smell, my hearing, my equilibrium. But what they found out later that day was that I literally survived the fall by 1/2 inch. The base of my skull had been fractured all the way through, but I had missed my brainstem by 1/2 inch. And I had no doubt that that was how much that angel had moved my head by. It was very impactful. I had so much traumatic brain injury that it was a long, long time before I could process this. I remember I literally couldn't even stand up or walk by myself for quite a while. And so my ability to comprehend what happened didn't come until later, although there were really vivid memories and that knowing of what had happened that I was carrying with me. And once again, I just didn't know what to do with this. So it took me a really long time to tell anyone. And it took me a long time to realize that I had signed up for something that I didn't know exactly how I was going to make it work. I was overcome with the physical trauma from this near-death experience. I was in the hospital for about 10 days. I came home. I had a hard time walking. I could barely balance. Because of the traumatic brain injury, I needed a lot of sleep and rest. I'd lost part of my memory. I would run into people at different places that knew me, and I couldn't remember who they were. It was very disorienting and somewhat scary to even realize that people in my life that I had known, I had forgotten at this point in time. So I was really just trying to navigate life and very much in survival mode. Once again, with this near-death experience, I didn't even have time to think about it or dive into it. I was just trying to survive. And so it really wasn't until a couple months later, in January of 2012, where some of the significance of it started to reveal itself again. And at that point, in January, my son Josh, who was 5 years old at the time of my accident and had tried to call 911, but we believed his call did not go through, started getting very depressed. And he would tell me, he would tell my mom, he would tell my mother-in-law, anyone who listened, he would say, I didn't need to be there. I didn't help my mom. And we would say, Josh, you did. You opened the door for the policeman. And he would just say, Sophie could have done it without me. My call didn't go through. So the end of January, my grandfather, who had passed away when I was 12 years old, came through to me in a massive visit. I had never had one like this from him. I actually remember seeing him standing in front of me, and I've never had that happen before. And I remember him looking at me with the most loving, beautiful eyes and smile. I remember feeling that unconditional love from him. And as he looked at me, I said to him, "It's been so long since I've seen you." And he smiled and he said, "I knew it would seem like that to you." And as he proceeded, he started talking about my son, Josh, and he started talking about my accident. My grandfather and Josh, they never walked this earth at the same time. So he made me really aware that he knew about my life and about my children. And he talked about Josh being good with electronics, talking about my head injury. And then before he left, he said to me, "You should get the 911 recording. There's something on there you need to know." And he was gone. And I remember thinking, I don't even know that I can get that. How do I do that? And what is on there that he has come through to tell me about? So it took me a couple weeks and I ordered it from the police department. When it came in, I remember putting it in and I remember listening to it. I remember hearing them say, "911, what's your emergency?" And in his little broken voice, I heard my son Josh say, "Sophie, what do I say?" And he laid the phone down. So he had called right when the trauma had happened. And for the next minute and a half, you can hear 911 trying to get their attention. And you can hear the kids in the background talking. And at some point, Josh says, "I'm going to push the panic alarm button on the house." And my daughter, Sophie, said, "Hold on, let me try calling 911. She hung up the phone and then her call went through. And they actually ended up connecting her with the fire department that was on the way to the house that day. When Josh came home from school as a kindergartner, I remember getting him that day. And I remember telling him, "Josh, you did help me. Help was coming. Your call went through." And it was like I had lifted this 10,000-pound weight off this little 5-year-old boy. I remember seeing his self-confidence flood back into him. I remember just seeing his idea and him light up of being able to help me. And it literally shifted what I believe was the course of his life, because at the age of 5, my grandfather from the other side had information that could help him that I didn't even know existed. And that was the moment that I was able to really start realizing that my agreement to come back and to be a mediumship and help people was very profound. And I got to see firsthand of somebody that I love so dearly, how it could change their life. In the aftermath of my traumatic brain injury, both of my children and my daughter Ashley were very shooken up. They sent a police car to pick Ashley up at school. And Josh and Sophie got to be there when I was wheeled out into the ambulance. There are a couple really profound things that I remember. I remember Sophie came to the hospital a few days after when they were finally able to see me. And she told me that the firemen had turned on the sirens so that she would know help was coming and that they weren't alone. And Josh had picked up my watch off the counter where the firemen had taken it off before they wheeled me out. And he had carried it in his pocket to keep it safe until he could see me again. And when I got home from the hospital in the following months, the kids both had written different papers and different assignments on how scared they were, thinking that I was going to die and that I wasn't going to be able to come back to be with them. And I have no doubt that that was why I agreed to come back, because I had the choice and I wasn't going to leave my kids behind. As I started to recover from my traumatic brain injury and after my grandpa had come through, I really started to get more information for people around me. And it was spontaneous. I wasn't looking for it, but it was mediumship information coming through. I had a friend whose husband had passed from suicide at that point in time, and some other people who were near to me. And I had no way of controlling this at that point in time, and I honestly did not know what to do with it. I was scared to talk to people about it because I didn't have anyone in my life that would understand it. So what did I do? I went to counseling. And as spirit would have it, I was taken to an amazing counselor named Cheryl Cross. And as I proceeded to share my story with her and tell her the things that were happening in my life, she said, "Michelle, what a gift. Let's get you a mentor." And that was the first person in my life that I was able to openly share all of these experiences with. And she was the one who actually told me that what I had experienced were called near-death experiences. And so all of a sudden I had found that person that started putting meaning into my life and believing in what I was doing. As I proceeded to get a mentor and started to share this, what I quickly found was that there were people in my life who were very supportive and others who were not on board. And unfortunately, one of the people not on board was my husband at the time. There were a couple friends that had a hard time with this, and these are what I believe are fearful religious beliefs that kept them from being able to support me. I was really blessed in the fact that my mom and dad, and I still had many good friends who did support me in this journey. And so as I chose to step into becoming the medium that I had agreed to be in my third near-death experience, I found division. I definitely found contrast. I found emotional challenges because I wanted my family to stay together. And yet with every step that I took toward becoming this medium, which felt very sacred to me, it was an agreement that I had made in that heavenly realm, there became more division in my marriage. And he would try to just act like it wasn't happening. He didn't want me to talk to people about it. He didn't want to hear about the messages that I was getting. And so it became a point where I had to start hiding who I was, and yet loving my mediumship, which is what I love. That ability to share those messages became such a passionate part of my life, and I couldn't share it with the one person I should have been able to share it to, was my husband at the time, and he wasn't open to hearing it. So even though I had this red flag, and I remembered what my life guides had said in my third near-death experience, the calling to follow through on the mediumship and to really believe in who I was and to start learning and trusting and step into it was so strong it could not be denied. So years later, my marriage of 25 years ended in divorce. And that was really largely based on the fact that we had started separating and going our different directions because I was following my calling, and it was something that he had a very challenging time with. There were friends that dropped off along the way too. And you get to this period in time where there were days where I wondered, at what cost did I agree to do this? How many people will I lose in my life? Will there be new people who will come in and believe me and support me? Am I choosing a lonely life by honoring this path? But what I found over and over again was that on a soul level, we're all being called to honor our own path and express ourselves as fully as we can and as fully as we know how to. And with that faith and that step that I would continue to take and doing that every day, I really started to move into who I came to be on a soul level. And at least at that point in time, and be able to share the messages with people that they were ready to hear. What I came to find later on was that actually each of our souls come to this realm we call Earth with a plan and things that we want to learn and experiences that we want to have. And so although the challenges in my life were choosing myself over staying the way that my husband wanted me to stay or following through with my goals, really were something that I had chosen on a soul level. And he had come in to help me learn to love myself and to choose myself and actually allow myself to be the best expression of myself that I can be. And in my human life, that didn't feel good because what that meant was my marriage was coming to an end. But on the soul level, the gift of that was really letting me find who I am in the present moment, and the almost pushing to know that at some point I had to choose between him or myself. and that I got the gift of choosing me. I believe that the relationship on the other side between myself and my ex-husband on a soul level is purely love. And I think that that is very true for most of us in life, if not all of us, because what happens is we connect to souls that we are very close to and very often ask them to play a challenging role in our life. And what they say to you on that heavenly realm is, I love you, and if this is a lesson you want to learn, I'll help you do it. And so although at times this earthly realm is challenging, even still, between him and I know that on a soul level, our souls only know love. What I found working through my own experience and as a medium working with others and being able to dive into soul plans more deeply, what I have found is that it's our souls that have lessons that we want to learn. It's not coming from our human form. It's our higher self. With that being said, if you have had any type of really disturbing challenges in your life, this wasn't your choice. And I would never condone anyone to share any negative energy with anyone, because our lessons here are always about love and how do we overcome challenges. And that is part of our free will as humans. Every day, with everything that we are faced with, we have the opportunity to meet it with love. And that's part of our huge goal here. In 2019, I was working at a white party up in Paradise Valley, and I was there as a medium. And at that night, there were about 100 guests. And I remember I met this one person who stood out, and he did healing energy work, and his name was Gary. He and I became friends. At that point in time, I was still in my marriage, but we would text, we would kind of keep up with each other, and it was there, and we knew each other, but it was also not something or someone that I regularly saw. So as time went on and I had filed for divorce, Gary and I stayed in contact, and at some point, and I can't even tell you when our first date was, it turned into a relationship. And with that, I got to see a side of partnership that I had never seen in my marriage. And I remember feeling a sense of love from him that I didn't even know was possible, and acceptance. So he and I had a beautiful relationship. He had suffered with depression on and off over the years, and I was aware of that. But what would usually happen is he would go and have, a good period of time, and then maybe a few days where he needed to unplug from the world. He would literally turn off his phone and his computer and sleep through it because of the depression. So in August of 2023, he and I actually, prior to this, had decided that we were going to spend our lives together. We were planning on moving in. He was getting along great with my kids. We were absolutely becoming a family. And in August of 2023, when I was out of town, he transitioned by suicide. And what happened was I had been visiting family with my oldest daughter, and he had actually been at my house that morning. He had gone outside and watered my plants and taken care of my dogs and said hi to my daughter, Sophie, pulled in my garbage can, waved hi to my neighbor. He and I had texted at 10:30 in the morning, and he was saying that things were going well. And he went home and he took his life. So later that afternoon, unaware of the decision that he had made, I had texted him before we left the airport to go home. There was no response. The next morning, I had called, text, messaged him, and there was still no response. So I called his work, and they said that he had called in sick. At this point in time, he was living with his younger daughter, who was a law student, and she wasn't really open to meeting me or spending time with me. So I drove by his house that morning, and I saw his car and her car there. And so I thought that I was happy that he was home, and I just assumed he was having one of these times where he needed some space. We had a party that we were scheduled to go to that night. And I went to the party, and all of our friends asked where he was. And I said that, I just thought that he was at home and, having a hard time, but he would be okay. So I went home that night, and as I was in my bathroom getting ready to go to bed, I felt him come in behind me. I remember seeing exactly what he was wearing. And I remember knowing that this was mediumship. And he looked at me and he said, "You sure are beautiful," because he would always talk to me like that. And as he said that, I felt my body start to give out because I knew what was happening. And I was able to make it to my bed. And I felt him lay down behind me. And he put his arm over me. And he said, "I wanted to be the one to tell you." And so it was through my mediumship that I was able to find out that he had transitioned and taken his life. A couple hours later, I texted his sister to confirm it. And she texted me back in the morning and said, "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this." And so what happened for me was it pushed me on a whole nother level of my journey. I remembered my life guide saying that my marriage would most likely end in divorce, which it had. And I remember them saying that there was more trauma coming. But this was beyond anything that I could imagine. And it really sent me into figuring out what was my soul plan with Gary. And how could I possibly agree to this? Because I knew that for the first time in my life, I had felt a love that I had never felt before. And it was certainly not something that I wanted to lose. So I started to dive into our soul plan. And there were a few things that I found. So one was that from spirit guiding me and also doing a life between life regression and being able to look into the soul plan, I realized that Gary was not destined to leave by suicide, but in his soul plan, it was much more likely that he could leave that way than someone else. And I realized that the agreement that he and I had was that if he chose to leave that way, I would be able to help more people with it because I had an understanding of it from working as a medium and from then actually personally experiencing it. And I realized that Gary had actually chosen to stay longer so that I could feel that type of love that I had not ever known before, and that he could also feel my love, and he could really find and feel for the first time in his life that he was truly lovable. So even looking at the challenge of this and the contrast of this experience, it was still built around love. And it was still built around me being able to feel his love, him being able to feel mine, and that if this situation occurred, I would find a way to help more people with it, for them to understand that even if a loved one transitions by suicide, they are gently and beautifully and compassionately taken right into the light. You still get to go home. But here's the thing about suicide. It's like dropping out of high school. You don't get to learn all of your lessons. So you can still go to the high school graduation, but you won't get the diploma. And that's part of the challenge if somebody decides to leave that way, is that their mission didn't really get complete. And the agreements that they made with other people on a soul level have now been left open-ended. And so in the heavenly realm, they're trying to find people to help fulfill agreements and promises that they made on earth. They're trying to help us. They're working harder. They're understanding where things went wrong in their life or how their decision impacted others. And there are still lessons left unlearned that their soul wanted to complete in this lifetime here. In a way, Gary's suicide was for me a fourth near-death experience. It was the death of my heart. And even as a medium who had worked with people who had come from suicide situations and being able to connect to spirit on the other side, what I realized was there was no way for me to humanly bypass the grief, the moments of guilt, the confusion, and maybe even more for me with this weight of being a psychic medium. How did this happen? How did this happen in my life? How did I not see this coming? And so the challenges with that for me on the human side were very gut-wrenching, and I couldn't bypass them with my spiritual knowledge. I still can't. There are still days I just have to feel what I have to feel. And what I know for Gary is that he will come back at some point in the future. He will reincarnate to finish learning the lessons that he wasn't able to complete in this lifetime. And it won't be as a punishment from God, source, or the divine. It will be of the own free will calling of his soul, saying, hey, I wanted to learn that, and we missed this part. And so there will be that opportunity for him, and he'll choose it, because our souls are seekers of evolution. That is the truth of every soul, and we want to know more, and we want to grow, and we want to expand. There's different time frames for different souls on how long they rest on the other side or they wait. And it's very common that when they have transitioned by suicide, they are met with not just the love and the compassion, but also almost like a team of angelic beings or life guides, a team of healers that come to hold this space for them so they can look at it and they can see what went wrong, and they can heal in ways so that they're not carrying this trauma with them into their next life or into their future. What I have found as I've been processing the loss of my life partner from suicide is that I really don't find peace in the human situation. That's not where my peace is in this. It's in the soul plan. It's in knowing that on a soul level, he is safely home and loved and still connected to me. But I don't find the peace in my daily life. There are a million times a day where I think, I miss you. You should be here. I love you. I long to feel your hand holding my hand. So there's not a way that I can actually really come to peace, maybe, in the humanness, except just by knowing that he is okay. He's better than okay. He's continued to live and grow and experience life and experience my life with me still. But it's hard. So we have to honor where we are and honor what we feel at the time. And as I look back at my soul plan up until this point in time, I would definitely say this. You don't need to have 3 near-death experiences to awaken. I feel like I did it the hard way. I think each NDE was an opportunity for me, and for whatever reason, I chose to ignore it, or I didn't have an understanding or a container to put it in until I got to my 3rd one. And at that point in time, it was blown open, and it was an agreement that I made, and at the same time, probably the original agreement that I had come in with, that I had been ignoring all of those years, which started with my grandfather's passing at 12. And Gary being part of my soul plan and his transition also led me to dive deeper into who I am and how I choose to show up in this human experience. Because at the end of the day, we are all souls having a human experience. And our soul chose that so that we can learn and grow in the contrast of life. And sometimes we get so busy looking at the contrast that we forget that there's magic to be found here too. And that our soul also wanted to come and play in the magic that happens on planet Earth. And that is every bit as important, or maybe more, than facing the contrast, because you're able to do both. One of the questions I love to be asked is, why would a soul choose to leave heaven? The answer to that is really based in the contrast that we have on planet Earth. So I want you to think about going to your favorite vacation spot and being there for about 200 years. At some point, you're going to look around and you're going to say, is there a new restaurant? Is there a new movie playing? What can we do now? I've hiked these trails 100 times. And this is the idea of going to heaven. When we are in this perfect realm, number one, our soul wants to learn. And so we choose to come back to the contrast to learn in. The other thing is, I like to say, think about your human experience. Even when you go on vacation for a week or 2 weeks, at some point you're starting to itch and you want to get back to life, right? So the perfection will always be there, that perfect realm called heaven. And we love to go and visit, but we also love to come and play in the contrast, which shows up in large ways and small ways in this lifetime. But with each decision you make, you get the opportunity to learn and grow and love. I would define contrast as anything that gives you the opportunity to see two sides of a story. So often we see this on the news, or we might find it in our relationships, right? We have an opinion and our partner or our friend or our family has a different opinion. Contrast shows up regularly here on planet Earth, which is why I believe it's one of the hardest schools you can go to on a soul level. But with that, the contrast is really meant so that you get to know yourself better and you get the opportunity to show up with love in situations that might be challenging for you at times. To me, the contrast is more about shadow versus light. Very often we see things that feel right or feel wrong, or we choose a political affiliation and we think the other team is dark or bad, right? So on planet Earth, it is a play very often of shadow versus the light, and you getting to choose where you want to stand and really getting the opportunity, though, to embrace the shadow within yourself. Because when we embrace those parts of us that we're worried about or we think aren't good enough or we don't want people to know about, what we actually find out is that it gives us the ability to shed more light in our life for the people around us and really show up stronger in this world. The reason that we are all individually veiled, and I do say individually because some people have a thicker veil, other people have a thinner veil. Think of it as a frequency or a vibration that is perfectly aligned with your soul and your soul's plan. We have this individual veil so that we can actually come here and have the human free will of making the right decision and of getting to know ourselves. And when I say the right decision, it's that in every opportunity, we are always given the choice to choose from a higher perspective or a place of love. And with this veil that we each have around us, without being able to, say, tap into your soul and what your soul already knows to be true, we get the free will to find it again and to really express who we are in soul form here on planet Earth. In pre-birth planning, we sit down with souls from our soul family group, and we start to think about the lessons and the challenges that we want to face in our human incarnation. We're also surrounded with life guides and the angels that we're going to pick to see us through that lifetime. And we really sit down and we say, hey, I need you to play my mom. I need you to play my dad. In this lifetime, for me specifically, it was the challenge of, how does Michelle step into who she really is, even when the contrast is telling her to stay someone else that she isn't anymore? And so for me specifically, with my ex-husband and with Gary, all of these opportunities that I chose prior to coming in gave me the opportunity to really see who I am and who I can be. And so on a soul level, we are really loving these other souls, even when they show up and play the villain or the hard part in our life, because they've actually come to help us grow. On a soul level, when somebody plays a challenging part in your life, it is the expression of love, because what happens is you get to grow through it on the human level. And so although your humanness might not be feeling the love from this other soul or the situation or the argument, what you're being asked to find is who you are and how do you show up in this world as, for me, the person that I'm playing right now, Michelle, right? And so with that, it's an act of love from the other soul to really say, I love you, I've got your back, I know you want to learn this lesson, and let me see the part that I can play to help you achieve your goal.